CEO tells black waitress, "You'll always be nothing," then sees her on the news next morning. What if the person everyone ignored was quietly building something that could change the world? Amira Davis was used to being invisible. At 26, she'd spent her life slipping through the cracks of Chicago's South Side, first as a kid in shelters, then as a woman carving out a future against odds stacked higher than the city's skyline. Her skin was dark, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes carried a quiet fire that most people never bothered to notice. She worked nights at the Iron Grill, a downtown steakhouse where the plates cost more than her weekly grocery budget. By day, she was a student at Malcolm X Community College, drowning in coding assignments, housing crisis statistics, and a dream too big for her cracked phone screen to hold. Amira's childhood wasn't a storybook. Her mother, LaToya, had been a seamstress with a laugh that could light up a room, until eviction notices snuffed it out. Twice, they'd been forced out of their homes, once when Amira was 7, clutching a stuffed bear as movers tossed their belongings onto the curb, and again at 12, when they spent 6 months in a shelter that smelled of bleach and despair. Those years taught Amira two things: the poor were invisible to the world, and survival meant building your own way out. Her way out was Homebridge, an app she'd been piecing together for 2 years. It wasn't just code, it was a lifeline. Homebridge would connect low-income families to emergency housing, rental assistance programs, and landlords who didn't turn away Section 8 vouchers or single mothers with spotty credit. It was born from nights spent Googling legal aid networks on library computers, from memories of her mother crying over rejection letters, from the ache of knowing how many families were one missed paycheck from the street. Amira wasn't chasing Silicon Valley glory. She was chasing justice. At the Iron Grill, she moved like a ghost, refilling wine glasses for men who didn't bother to meet her eyes. Her uniform, black slacks, white shirt, name tag, was a costume that hid her ambition. Between shifts, she'd sit in the break room, sketching wireframes on napkins or debugging code on her phone, its screen spiderwebbed from a fall she couldn't afford to fix. Her co-workers, mostly other young women scraping by, knew she was working on something big, but to the customers, she was just the help. It was a Friday night in late October, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. The Iron Grill was packed, the air thick with the sizzle of steaks and the buzz of a tech conference after-party. Amira was assigned to the private backroom, where a group of executives had reserved a table. They were loud, their suits tailored, their voices carrying the confidence of men who'd never known hunger. One man stood out, Ethan Caldwell, CEO of Nextwave Ventures, a venture capital darling known for his disruptive startups and a smile that never reached his eyes. His VC badge dangled from a lanyard, a status symbol he wore like a crown. Amira poured water, her movements precise, her face neutral. She'd learned long ago to tune out the chatter, but tonight, she couldn't. She overheard a coworker, Jasmine, ask about her weekend plans. "I'm pitching my app at a startup fair tomorrow," Amira said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's called Homebridge. For housing access." Jasmine's eyes lit up. "That's dope, Amira. You're gonna kill it." Ethan Caldwell overheard. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of bourbon, and let out a chuckle that silenced the table. "Cute," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Another waitress with a tech dream. What's next? An Uber driver building AI?" His table erupted in laughter, a chorus of privileged amusement. "Stick to serving, sweetheart. You'll always be nothing but a server." The words landed like a punch to Amira's gut. Her hands shook as she gripped the pitcher, water sloshing slightly. She wanted to snap back, to tell him about the nights she'd spent coding until dawn, the grant she'd applied for, the families she'd interviewed to understand their needs. But she couldn't. Not here. Not when her rent was due, and her mother's medical bills were piling up. She swallowed the rage, forced a tight smile, and kept pouring. The table laughed again, their voices blurring into a haze of mockery. As she cleared plates later, she caught Ethan's eye. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge her. To him, she was nothing, a prop in his world of deals and dollars. But Amira burned the moment into her memory. She'd make him eat those words. The next morning, Amira stood in a community center gymnasium, her stomach knotted from nerves and lack of sleep. The Chicago Startup Fair was a chaotic mix of folding tables, pitch decks, and hopeful entrepreneurs. Her booth was a card table with a borrowed laptop, a stack of printed flyers, and a poster she'd made herself. Homebridge's prototype wasn't perfect. Her code was a patchwork of Stack Overflow solutions and late-night epiphanies, but it worked. It had a clean interface, a database of local housing resources, and a feature that alerted users to emergency shelters within a 10-mile radius. She wore her only blazer, a thrift store find that didn't quite fit, and her hair was pulled back, her eyes bloodshot but determined. The judges, 3 men and 1 woman, all in their 40s, with credentials from MIT and Stanford, moved from booth to booth, their clipboards a silent judgment. Amira's heart pounded as they approached. She wasn't like the other pitchers, with their polished slides and tech jargon. She was raw, real, and carrying a story no one else in the room could tell. "Hi, I'm Amira Davis," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Homebridge is an app to help low-income families find safe, affordable housing. I built it because I know what it's like to lose your home. When I was 7, my mom and I were evicted. We lived in shelters for years. I learned early that the system fails people like us, not because the resources don't exist, but because they're hard to find and harder to access. Homebridge changes that." She walked them through the app, showing how it aggregated rental aid programs, connected users to legal aid, and flagged discriminatory landlords using public data. The judges asked questions about scalability, user acquisition, data privacy. Amira answered with a mix of research and raw honesty. "I'm not here to make billions," she said. "I'm here to make sure no kid has to sleep in a shelter because their mom didn't know where to turn." The judges nodded, scribbling notes. 1. A woman with kind eyes lingered after the others moved on. "You're doing something important," she said. "Don't stop." Amira's chest tightened. For the first time in years, she felt seen. A week later, Amira was wiping down tables at the Iron Grill when her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. Spam calls were common, but the number had a Chicago area code. "Hello," she answered, bracing for a bill collector. "Ms. Davis, this is Dr. Karen Ellison from the National Social Impact Innovation Grant." Amira froze, a rag dangling from her hand. "I'm pleased to inform you that Homebridge has won this year's grant. You'll receive $100,000 in seed funding, 6 months of mentorship, and an invitation to present at the National Tech Summit in San Francisco." Amira's knees buckled. She sank into a chair, her co-workers staring as tears welled in her eyes. "Are you serious?" she whispered. Dr. Ellison laughed. "Very serious. Your pitch was unforgettable. We believe in you." Within weeks, Amira's life transformed. She quit the Iron Grill, though she hugged Jasmine and promised to stay in touch. The grant money funded a small team, 2 coders from her college and a housing advocate she'd met through her research. Homebridge was piloted in Chicago, Detroit, and Oakland, with local nonprofits on board to test its impact. CNN ran a segment on her, titled "From Waitress to Innovator: How One Woman is Changing Housing Access." Housing reform activists praised her on X, calling Homebridge a game-changer for equity. Her inbox overflowed with messages from families who'd found help through the app. But Amira didn't let the spotlight distract her. She worked harder, refining the app, meeting with tenants' rights groups, and learning the business side of tech, terms like burn rate and user retention that felt foreign but necessary. She rented a tiny office in a co-working space, her first real workspace, and pinned a photo of her mother above her desk. LaToya, now in remission from breast cancer, called her daily, saying, "I always knew you'd do something big." The National Tech Summit in San Francisco was a whirlwind of glass-walled conference rooms, keynote speeches, and tech bros in hoodies pitching crypto scams. Amira felt out of place in her simple black dress, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd earned her spot. Her keynote was scheduled for the second day, a 20-minute slot to share Homebridge's story. She'd practiced for weeks, her slides simple but powerful, her voice steady with purpose. As she stepped onto the stage, the auditorium lights blinding, she scanned the crowd. Tech executives, investors, and journalists filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Then, in the third row, she saw him, Ethan Caldwell. His suit was less pristine now, his badge marking him as a guest, not a speaker. His startup, Next Wave Ventures, had tanked after a series of bad investments, its collapse splashed across TechCrunch weeks earlier. He looked smaller, his smirk gone, his eyes wide with recognition as Amira's name flashed on the screen. She didn't flinch. She didn't acknowledge him. She began her speech, her voice carrying the weight of her journey. "I built Homebridge because I know what it's like to be invisible," she said. "To be told you're nothing. This app isn't just code, it's a promise to families who deserve better." The audience leaned in, captivated by her story, her data, her vision. She showed screenshots of Homebridge in action, shared stories of families who'd found homes, and outlined plans to scale nationally. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that echoed through the hall. Ethan sat frozen, his face pale. The woman he'd mocked as just a server was now the darling of civic tech, her name trending on X, her app backed by major foundations. Amira didn't need to call him out. The irony was louder than any words she could have said. Back in Chicago, Amira sat with her mother in their small apartment, now paid for with her grant money. LaToya held her hand, her eyes shining with pride. "You did this for us," she said. "For all of us." Amira smiled, but her mind was already on the next steps, expanding Homebridge to more cities, integrating AI to predict eviction risks, partnering with schools to reach families faster. The $100,000 was a start, but it wasn't enough. She'd need more funding, more allies, more late nights. And she was ready. On her phone, a notification pinged, a message from a young woman in Detroit who'd used Homebridge to find a safe apartment for her kids. "Thank you," it read. "You gave us a home." Amira's eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She saved the message, a reminder of why she'd started. Ethan Caldwell's words still lingered in her mind, but they no longer hurt. They were fuel. Every time she doubted herself, she'd remember his smug chuckle, and keep going. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a builder, a dreamer, a voice for the invisible. And she was just getting started. Success wasn't just her clapback, it was her legacy. And it was louder than any insult could ever be.